As you do with introspection and reflection, looking back, I've been seeking gatherings and seeking ceremony in so many parts of my life. I was the kid at university who was trying to bring everybody together for a Canadian Thanksgiving and getting people to tell stories about where they came from and what their traditions were. And it's just been something that's always been part of the way I wanted to show up. I'm a natural storyteller. I started my career as a journalist. I then moved to Scotland and did a master's in cultural mythology. So I'm really fascinated by the way we tell stories across culture, across time. I'm drawn to archetypes. And through that, I discovered this idea of ritual and rites of passage and how we move through times of change in our lives. I then started looking around at my own life. I'm secular, don't have overly strong connections to my cultural heritage. And there's just a lack of ritual and a lack of ceremony, which, was first really highlighted when my husband and I went to get married. We kind of looked at the traditional kind of wedding in front of us and we're like, well, that doesn't quite feel like us. It feels, I started researching the history of certain rituals and I didn't connect with them. So he and I kind of went off the path and built and designed our own ceremony based on who we were as people. For us, we really kind of honed in on why we were getting married. His family's all from Sweden and was flying here. His dad had been given a terminal diagnosis. So we knew this was the only time that we would be together as two kind of large family units. So the participation, the connection, the engagement, all of that was so important. So we intentionally designed our own wedding. And I learned so much. And I also realized I knew so much. There was so many things that I'd been training for. In my 20s, I did, and I'll talk about it later, rigorous training in something called the art of hosting, which I know that Priya has trained in. It's been around since 1999. It's kind of an open source way of connecting and gathering people, and it's all around harvesting. So what's the purpose of a meeting? What are we going to get from it? What are we going to do with it? The art of hosting kind of has these amazing structures and parameters that I have been bringing into so many parts of my life. I'm also trained in something called the circle way, which is around gathering people in a circle with no hierarchy. There's no one in charge. Everyone has a role. So as I started to really see all these threads, our wedding was a great way for me to kind of bring that training in. Over the next year and then over the next 6 years from that, we went through unimaginable loss and stress and grief. My husband and I, we lost his dad. We had 3 recurrent miscarriages. We almost lost my dad to lung cancer. My brother was given a horrible medical diagnosis. We had friends get divorced. We had friends lose parents. Like there was just so much grief and death and dying, and people were so scared to talk about it. And they, something bad would happen and someone would say, oh, I don't know what to do. And so for the most part, they would do nothing. And I'm a disruptor. I'm a naturally kind of curious person. And when I feel like there's resistance to something, I tend to kind of walk toward the danger. So I really started to understand my own fear of death and dying and how we approach death and dying in a secular culture. I'm an end-of-life doula and an end-of-life storyteller. I'm a funeral celebrant. I kind of go into this space and I help people create end-of-life gatherings that stem from all of this work that I've been doing, looking at archetype, looking at tradition, looking at ritual, looking at how we engage people. And so they're not just sitting there watching a ceremony unfold, they're part of it. So just last night, I led 22 people in a grief ceremony where we swam in the ocean. People came who had just lost a child, lost a spouse, had gone through a divorce, all this grief that they were holding. And I helped give them a place to acknowledge that grief and share it and leave it in the sea. So yeah, that's been kind of my work with a company called Seeking Ceremony. It's me as a celebrant. When the pandemic hit, my husband, who's in tech, lost his job. He was the CTO of a tech travel startup, so not where you want to be at the beginning of a pandemic. He and I kind of quickly battened down the hatches and tried to figure out what we wanted to build and design around our life. And he's an innovator and he wanted to kind of create something that didn't exist before. So I started looking at all these hundreds of secular and universal rituals and these tools that I'd been gathering, and we kind of put all of that knowledge into an app that we built. That's like a create your own ceremony, choose your own ritual adventure. So if you are planning a celebration of life or a death anniversary, or on the opposite side, if you're, going through IVF or infertility, or if you have a miscarriage, or if you, welcome a child into this world and you want to kind of do something different than a traditional baby shower. And then right through the life cycle, we're starting to join. So if you're moving out of a childhood home, how can you say goodbye to that home with intention? And you go into our app and you pick and choose the rituals that you like, and it kind of guides you through a ceremony that you are welcome to divert from. I'm a big believer in being descriptive and not prescriptive. I think that so many of the ceremonies that we're taught and we follow, and we're like, oh, okay, well, this is the ceremony. And we lose that creativity. We lose that kind of, like what Priya talked about, we lose that intention. Like, what is the purpose of this? Are we just doing this way because that's how it's done? And then what are we missing by following that path? What happened when we actually look around and look up and look down and kind of start to see these different experiences? A celebration of life is a great example. You get people coming together, many of whom haven't seen each other for 15, 20, 30 years. And they move right into the grief kind of space or the celebration of life space. And we miss out on an opportunity for connection and catching up and all of that. So yeah, the Be Ceremonial is still in its infancy. We have about 1,000 people around the world using our app kind of on a regular basis. It's really exciting because it's disrupting and it's new. It's also challenging because, like a lot of you probably, we have this idea of what ritual and ceremony is, and we're trying to re-educate people and help them remember that it doesn't have to follow this very strict kind of pattern. It can be what you need it to be, and give people that permission to gather in ways that are meaningful to them. So that's a bit of an overview.
That's fantastic. That's a really great overview. And I think that just helps sort of lay some context for like your story and your background and how you got involved. Thank you. What I want to do is ask everybody right now, sort of like, when they saw the title, The Art of Gathering, what spoke to them about it? I know like someone like Jazz is like, Carolyn sends out a book club and she's very compliant and she'll read it, but like, what called you about this title, everybody? What called you about the book?
To me, I think it's like a lot more timely because we hadn't been gathering for a while, and then it feels like, people are learning to kind of be together again and out in this world. So that's kind of what I found interesting about it.
Great. What about you, Lena? Like, you with no sort of prior background info with us, like what called you to participate or read it?
I think it was just like the timing, like Jasmine said. I am typically the one that hosts like the family gatherings, and no one really takes the initiative to do that, maybe because it's overwhelming and intimidating. And then, as Thanksgiving was coming up, I was like, should I have a family gathering? But how do I make it meaningful? Because it always seems like it's like kind of superficial at times, like
We're checking the box.
yeah, like, and then as I started reading the book, like I started to realize like, yeah, like I'm doing all the logistics, but when we're there, I feel good when everyone's together, we're all starting to connect. But how do I drive that, and why, make it so that everyone in the family is excited to gather? But then as well as like at work with our meetings, we have all these meetings. How do I make them meaningful and productive, but also keep everyone connected because we're working remote now? So there's a lot of different variables that drew me to the book. I'm not gonna lie. It was also because the book club is a gathering. I'm like, okay, I want to see how this framework works. And, I've always wanted to be part of a book club, and I never had that opportunity. So having this virtual opportunity, I was like, I can't mess this up. So that was also a big variable in
Awesome.
this. Yeah. So I haven't finished the book yet. I'm only on part 2, like halfway through. But I realize I'm getting more from it than I actually anticipated.
Great. And that's something that I'm hearing a lot, Megan. I don't know if you're hearing that too, is they're like, companies specifically are reaching out to me and they're like, my teams are like we're fragmented. We're sort of doing the in-person, we're sort of doing the hybrid, but like we're missing something. Like we're missing something. And that's the opportunity. That's the calling that I'm seeing right now. Megan, what are you hearing in your sort of worlds, in your circles, just around this disconnection that we're sort of experiencing as we emerge through the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are really curious to do things differently. They just don't know where to start. I think that's every person that I meet with, whether it's through, the app online and they send an email, or somebody in person. They're like, oh, that sounds really cool, but how do I even start? It's like we've forgotten how to build something intentional from scratch. We feel like we have to kind of follow the normal Thanksgiving and then try to add something into it, rather than just like starting over and being like, what actually does Thanksgiving mean to us as a family, and how do we want to honor it? And rather than, I mean, there is always a role for tradition, and I'm not saying that we should throw out tradition. But there are also rituals that we've kind of adapted and adopted, and we haven't allowed them to change because of fear or responsibility. So I think that when I meet with people, usually they think, usually they'll tell me that they're curious, they want to know more, but they feel kind of frozen with what to do next. So.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I know that while reading the book, like I sent out a blog, some of you might have read it, but I personally was involved in quite a few different types of gatherings this summer. And it really like created this nice backdrop against everything that we were doing. And I actually resulted in some pretty like robust conversations with people around something I've never talked about before, which is like, who should be invited? Because of my natural like behavioral tendency, I am a lover of people, and I'm like, let's include everybody, like everybody that would like to be there, they should come. So that was just something. I'm not going to get into like, what did you get, but like, has your brain, as you're starting to read the book, is just like, where has your brain gone around sort of maybe failings of your past gatherings or your behavioral tendencies for gatherings? How is it influencing the way you're thinking about that gatherings right now? Doug?
I'll go. So maybe to answer the first question is, I didn't know what to expect when you gave us the book to read. Can't say I was that excited. But
why not? Let me ask you that. Why weren't you excited? Why do you think that was?
What it was about. And I wasn't sure, like gatherings to me isn't, it wasn't as all encompassing as it actually becomes when you read the book. And then when I started to read the book, and I shared this, I wasn't overly excited about it. I was struggling my way through. And then all of a sudden, I started to get some aha moments. And I went like, and I started to think about all the gathering, so I read it because it was because I read the books in the book club, and I love gathering as Lena is doing. And so I started, but I got a lot out of it as I went through. And I mean, I don't know if this is the answer to the question that you were just asking, but I think the most important thing I got so far, and I'm 3/4 of the way through the book, so a decent amount. I got the point of leaving behind where you're coming from and arriving somewhere, and with as if there's a demarcation point and there's an entry, and that you have and facilitating that, because there are so many gatherings, whether it's a staff meeting, whether it's a retreat, whether it's a family dinner. There are so many gatherings, and that really got me going about how important it was to arrive fresh, if you will, with a different mindset than wherever you just came from.
Great. Awesome. Doug, what about you?
Well, I think your question about who are the right people at the moment? That's an interesting one, because I think back to your earlier question of what is being noticed in terms of gatherings is I'm seeing a lot of organizations that just want to get together for the sake of getting together. Whereas 5 years ago, it might have been, well, we need to get together because we have to do X, Y, and Z and accomplish these things. Now it's, and I just did one yesterday where there was some work that we went through, but at the end of the day, they just wanted to have everyone in the same room for a day. And if we happen to accomplish some stuff work-wise, great. That was sort of the bonus, whereas it was often the reverse in many of the things that I've done in my career before. So I thought that's been something I've noticed quite a bit in terms of the gathering side of things. And I think too, the other thing that I'm noticing is just people, and it's kind of been alluded to by a few people already, is just getting used again to what a gathering means and why it's important to them, or are they nervous about it because there's still pandemic issues floating? So there's just a lot of those little things that may not have been a factor before that I think are still a factor for people, or maybe more of a factor now than previously. So yeah, a couple of things that I think are still impacting how gatherings are taking place.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, my hope is that it's interesting that you said that they're gathering for the sake of gathering, because I feel the opposite. I feel like because people haven't been together, they're like, well, I think they know they need to gather, but they want to find more meaning behind it and purpose behind it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up, I've just pulled up sort of a couple of her rules that she talks about in the book. And so I thought maybe we could look at one of those. Just bear with me while I get it on the right slide, to just see what pops for you. Because, reading her book, what I really loved about it was her ability to sort of like weave through like personal and professional stories. So give me a hands up if you're looking at rules for gathering. Yeah, okay, great. I'm just gonna pop it up. So here are some of her rules. We've talked about, like, as Megan talked about in the art of the hosting, is like really making sure your gathering has a purpose, make purpose be your bouncer, design your invitations, just stitch etiquette. Like there's so many good rules sort of in the book. And like I said, it was the one around like make your purpose be your bouncer that really, for me, created this really rich discussion around who should come to an event that I was hosting. And that was like really the first time that I've considered that. So of sort of some of the rules that you guys have read in the book, which was a rule that stood out for you? And maybe Megan, I'll call on you first, because you really like, yeah, like you've done the training, you've done the facilitating. Like, what was it about this book or the rules that were really resonated, or was a good reminder for you?
Yeah, and it was interesting listening to Digby and Doug talk too. I also, Digby, the threshold moment for me is so important. Like how you enter a space and how you exit it, and I take so much time and care to help craft that in the ceremonies that I plan. I think one of my favorite like sub rules, I forget what rule number it was under, but she says, before your event starts, it has begun. And I think that so many people think that the event starts as soon as you walk in the door. And perhaps that's the case. If so, you've missed out on a huge opportunity. I think that sending out the email invitation or whatever it is that you're doing to invite people, that it starts then. And one of my favorite kind of ritual tools that I adapted to a celebration of life that I hosted, which we're talking about an end of life event, but this could be a meeting, this could be a birthday party, this could be anything, is everybody was going to be driving from different parts of the city to this venue. It was in Burnaby at a golf course. And, the young person who had died loved music. And we chose a song that was his favorite song and that kind of epitomized the way he lived his life. And we asked everybody to listen to that song in their car or in their headphones or as they were kind of driving up to the venue, because I wanted them to already be part of the event before they actually gathered together. And what I think it did for people was it gave them kind of that pause, that kind of time to reflect on their own connection with him, their own memories. It connected everybody before they even met in person. So everybody now had this song, this musical experience that had binded them. And it allowed people to enter in already in the mindset a little bit. And so for me, that idea of, the event starts, the event has begun long before it starts, is just a really good reminder that there are so many things you can do before you're actually in the Zoom room or in the boardroom or in the dining room, to invite people in to kind of think about things, to bring objects with them that kind of connect them, that idea of bringing their stories with them. So
let me just jump in here and ask you guys, have any of you ever been invited to be a part of an event before it begun, like with something creative like what Megan just described? Have any of you ever been invited like that? I'm just looking for other examples because I think it's so beautiful. No. No. Okay. I think it's great. So ideas like music, Megan, like what might be some ways that, like, so for example, yesterday I did a team training for a company that all work remotely. They flew in from Calgary, Victoria, and usually like I'll just send an email and be like, wear comfy clothes, remember your pen, arrive 5 minutes early, like what might be a fun, creative way that I could get them involved in the meeting that isn't like another, like a big lift, because I feel like so many people are just like, just let me show up, don't make me do too much pre-work. Do you have any ideas or suggestions for like inviting before a meeting, like something like that? It was a big day, like we were recalibrating sort of their cultural purpose and like reconnecting.
Yeah, I mean, the 5 senses is the fastest way to kind of drop into that, what I call the ritual mindset, but it's really it's that intention. And, it doesn't have to be a big giant intention that you have to think a lot about, but using some way of invoking the senses. I remember years ago, I ran a brand storytelling agency for 13 years, where I worked with corporate and nonprofit clients. And I was meeting with one client over and over again, and they were having these Monday morning meetings, and they were so flat. They were just dry. Like everybody had to come in Monday morning, and there wasn't time to kind of, share on a more personal note. It was like, let's just get down to business. And it was an hour long. And I sat in on one of them, and you could just feel the energy, just kind of like, oh, we're back at work. We're, a week ahead. And I'd read this great story from someone else years ago, and I kind of incorporated that version in. And we decided to every Monday have this bowl full of mandarin oranges and invite everybody to sit there and just quietly like peel the mandarin orange, and like the smell just kind of came in, the taste, and it just settled everybody in. It only took a few minutes, and not everybody had to have one. But we used that kind of mandarin moment as this idea of, let's take 5 or 10 minutes and just like settle. Let's let our cortisol kind of get connected in our nervous system. And, maybe there's some chit chat about the weekend, maybe not, maybe it's just a moment of quiet. But I had people come up to me like a year or two later and saying, whenever I smell oranges, I think back to those Monday morning meetings. And it became this small kind of, for them, a catalyst of like, oh, okay, we're stepping into this space now with intention. And I mean, last night, the gathering I held on the beach, I brought rosemary from my garden, and I invited everybody to sit and just to close their eyes and smell the rosemary. And it took, 15 seconds, but suddenly you could just feel the energy of the room kind of settle. And it was a simple way to just kind of enter in that space and kind of leave behind where we might have come from. So thinking about the senses in different ways, whether it's a cup of tea or listening to a song, that for me is always my go-to.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay. Let me turn the table over to you guys. What are some of the rules? What are some of the concepts from the book that stood out for you that were like, yeah, I want to remember that? And yeah, just go for it. Jazz?
I think like number 4 here, ditching etiquette for rules, and I'm not big on etiquette to begin with, but it just really resonated how etiquette could be, a gatekeeper versus rules being a gateway. I really like that concept. I think you know, having some set rules, however simple, like being present or, you know, turning your phones off. I think that could help a lot in focusing people. So that one I really remembered.
When you say etiquette, like not if like you were historically a fan of etiquette, like what do you mean by that?
I just, it sounds fussy to me, just like she described it in the book, you know, like the whole, this is where the fork goes or whatever. I think, I mean, that's not today's world. And it is very much like, oh, you have to be in the know, like going to that finishing school to be seen as I'm, you know, I'm good enough for this, or I know how things are. It's more, it's not as, it's exclusive as opposed to
Right.
inclusive.
Right. Great. Okay. Doug, have you been able to scan the book? Do you have any sort of like, has anything grabbed you?
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm cheating being here in the first place because I've only have sort of skimmed through a few pieces, but it is a book I'm very much needing and wanting to read. I think for me, the biggest one is actually the fifth one, like the closing with intention. And that actually hit me even yesterday with this session I was doing where it was good, but we ended up a little bit it got a little bit rushed at the end more than I would have liked. And the closing piece to me that I didn't lead that as well. So that's always something that I think about. And that ties, I think, even to how you kick things off back to what Megan was talking about in terms of the orange example. Like, I think that the bookending of things, I think, is often really important because whether we like it or not, those are often key moments that people will walk away remembering. And so it's, to me, that closing with intention is something I want to continue to focus on in things that I'm doing.
Great. Yeah, it really is easy to get to the end of the day, end of a training, just be like, okay, and we're done. See ya.
Yeah.
And then it's just like doesn't feel complete by any means. Digby, I know you guys have an upcoming little retreat for your team, a little getaway. Has it like influenced the way you thought about that at all, or anything new and different that you want to include that you might have not have?
Yeah, it's actually, that's what my mind's on as I'm reading the book, and Chris and I have been going back and forth. And so, and just the snapshot is we have a firm retreat. It's up in a Soyuz. We've done firm retreats up in a Soyuz before, not last one was 4 or 5 years ago, and we're all getting on a bus. And so there will be a bit of a threshold moment that way. And so it got me thinking about, like, how do we leave the office? Like, what is happening as 20 of us get on the bus? And so I think, you know, one of my thoughts is, you know, Kath and I are going to get champagne and orange juice, and we're going to like have it in the office as everybody's arriving. And like, it'll just be a moment like, oh, we are doing something. This is really special. And we're not just getting on a bus and chatting. Talked a lot about how we have people like when we're out and how we're sitting, and, you know, we're going to go through as you know, the DISC assessment I've talked about. Like, how do we prep people for that? So I've been doing a lot, and my last idea, which jumped into my head, which was, why don't we as we're getting in the bus, instead of like just kind of being who we are, because we all work together, why don't we all have to give ourselves a nickname that we're going to only use during this 3 days, and maybe create a pot that if we miss on the nickname, then we got to put money in a pot that we do something with for everybody at the end. So my mind's going, and I am really confident. And I'm not organizing it. I'm just the idea person.
No, I know. What's Kristen saying about all this? Just later, any ideas she's bringing in?
Well, she's just absorbing mine.
Okay.
Well, now Digby, you've got my mind racing because I'm like, oh, I've got so many ideas.
Yeah, I mean, but it was spurred. It wasn't exactly like copying, but I go like, wouldn't that be neat to be away and you're a different person because you've got a different name in a way, and you get to create that. It's like a little bit of a make-believe time for you. And thinking about how we work to get the groupings changed around a little bit. Then
Yeah, mixing
really
things up.
Anyway.
Great idea. No, that's good. It's good. I mean, I intentionally want you to start thinking about this. Like, the timing is so perfect. So perfect for you guys. Maybe you do need to reach out to Megan and pull some ideas from her too.
Yeah.
So a concept in the book that she talked about that really was like one of her cornerstones was the toast. And I feel like I missed something along the way, because I remember her saying she talked to her husband about it, and he said something about singing, and then she did the toast, and then there's a section on 15 toasts before a big meeting. I missed it. Like, how did she do the toast? Who can any of you guys remember? Like, how does she do it?
What page?
Well, it was sort of woven throughout because it was sort of her thing. I feel like I understood that maybe at the last person to do the toast had to sing it, or they had to sing the toast. Like, I missed something around the toast.
Full disclosure, I haven't finished the book. So
Okay. Do you know what I'm talking about with these toasts?
Yeah, it's right where I'm reading right now.
Yeah.
It's right in the 200s, but it was about singing, and yeah, I got it right here. It's literally what I read as I fell asleep last night. Sorry.
Yeah. So tell us something that would surprise us. I just can't. Yeah, it's too bad. Megan, you don't remember this part, the toasts? Like, it was sort of her flagship thing.
I remember it. I'm just not sure what the question is around it.
Well, what is it? Like, how did it work? Like, did she just get everybody to stand up and do a toast before the beginning of the dinner?
I think it was to do with singing. Like, I started, like, as I recall, it was something about everybody was going to get up and sing a
But
poem or
sing the toast? Like, that to me sounds like really courageous.
something like that. But then it didn't unfold the way she introduced it, I didn't think. So
No.
I can't answer, but I was reading as I was falling asleep last night.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, when you guys get to that part about the toasts, let me know, because I am always sort of looking for new ways of, like, rather than just doing an icebreaker, asking a question and getting people to talk. I just thought that I was curious to know. The singing rule was established with the 15 toasts as a way of nudging people towards risk taking. By creating a risk in not coming forward with the toast, we evened out the risk calculus. People had to decide which was worse, giving a toast early or singing. I think they had to sing if they were last. But anyway, it really was a big concept throughout that she wove, because it sort of used it with different populations, whether it be bringing sort of different people together, or in a business context, or a multi-generational sort of gathering. It was sort of her thing, and I just didn't fully understand it. So
I can give an example that might kind of take, because I do remember her talking a lot about it, and
Megan, I'm just gonna go on mute. The school's calling, so you keep talking, okay?
Okay. In thinking about, like, I love toast, but I also hate that formal somebody getting up on stage, or like all the attention. And I can public speak, but I don't love it. But I love the idea of people having an opportunity to share something meaningful. So this summer, it was my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, and we gathered our family in our backyard. There was 12 adults and 4 kids. And I researched a little bit, just based on knowing my brothers and their wives probably wouldn't want to kind of give a mushy speech or anything, but I still wanted it to be intentional. I wanted my parents to kind of feel the love of their children and grandchildren. And it wasn't just a regular family dinner. It was a 50th wedding anniversary. Like, it was different, and I wanted it to be different. So the traditional kind of symbol for a 50th wedding anniversary is gold. And my dad years ago worked in gold mining and would often find kind of fool's gold or pyrite. And so I went down to the rock and gem store, and I found a bunch of little nuggets of pyrite or fool's gold, and I placed one on everybody's table, including the kids. And I just said at the beginning of the dinner, at some point this evening, pick up your little nugget of gold, your little piece of wisdom, and share it back with mom and dad. Something you might have learned from them in their 50 years of marriage, or something that they've done that really inspired you. And it was such the kids as young as 4 and as old as 12. It gave them a really accessible way to kind of pick up their little nugget of gold and say, like, Nana and Papa, like, this is, this is what I'm thankful for. This is what you mean to me. And then we had a big bowl that they kind of plunked their little nugget of gold into. My sister-in-law, who is usually quite kind of reserved and, doesn't take a lot of time to express her emotions, picked hers up, and right away, like, you could just feel her choking back her love and her emotions. And she shared, and it's such a beautiful moment. She wouldn't have shared that had the catalyst of her having this little nugget of gold and So what it did for me is it was the great equalizer. We weren't going around in a circle. So that stresses people out. The idea of popcorning out, giving people autonomy and agency over how they share, when they share, and yet still creating those conditions around that experience. For the most part works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you have to kind of, learn your audience and reflect back. But for our 50th wedding anniversary, this did the trick, right? Everybody spoke, they said something, even if it was something as simple as "I love you." And they held on, you could see them holding this little piece of fool's gold and kind of just imbuing it with those emotions. And Mom and Dad got to go home with this bowl full of rocks that represented little nuggets of wisdom. So I like the idea of like flipping the traditional speeches on its head a little and moving away from that kind of somebody now has to get up and rehearse something and read something, and that works, that has a place. But for the most part, when we're gathering more informally, giving people that entryway in and that kind of agency can be really powerful.
Awesome. No, thank you. And thanks for jumping in there. The school has a tendency to call for like the smallest things sometimes, so it's a bit tricky. Let me ask this question, like, any of her stories around gathering sort of stand out for you? Like the white, like, it was interesting to know the story about Dîner Blanc, her time, like when she just like goes and like explores different neighborhoods. Any of her stories of gatherings like stand out for you as like, hey, I'd love to be a part of something like that. That sounds really cool. That's really different from what I would do day to day. Any of those stories stand out for you, Jazz?
I think what you just mentioned, like I think she called it her "I am here" days.
Yeah.
It seemed like a very long time. Like, I don't know if I could be out for 8 or 10 hours just walking the city, but just being present and exploring new areas and just kind of finding yourself in different situations that you never thought you'd be in, like, that sounded really cool to me.
Yeah, me too. And just like unplugging your device and like really getting to know that neighborhood, like taking in the different restaurants and the different cultural attributes or artifacts, I should say. That's cool. Digby,
Like, sorry, just like being a tourist in your own city, like,
Yeah.
you don't really do that, right? Like,
No.
you're good in a city that you've traveled to, but just exploring in your own city, like, I enjoyed reading that part.
Yeah, me too. Digby, did any of her gatherings stand out for you?
I don't think so. Like, nothing
No.
in particular. No.
Okay. What about, let me also ask you guys this question. Since COVID has sort of lifted and there has been much more gatherings, what have you been a part of a gathering that maybe felt a little bit different, or that was like maybe a little bit more meaningful than something that you would have participated in before? Have you had a really meaningful gathering experience in the last 6 months?
I guess kind of when I think about it that way, I think the way we do our staff meetings now is quite different because we do a combined remote, in person, and we've changed very much how we go about it, and it's now led by Wendy. So that seems like that's a real big change. That's all come about through COVID. And interestingly, we've debated whether we want to go back to in person or we want to do this hybrid model. And right now we're sticking with the hybrid. We think it creates a little bit of distance sometimes, and which is sometimes okay as well. And yet we're there. So
what do you mean by that? How is distance okay?
Well, I think sometimes when you get everybody in one room, you can, the leadership of the meeting can can be in the middle of everything. And when you are remote, you are leading, you have a chance to keep being focused on where everything's going a little bit. So I don't know, I haven't thought about it. I'm just starting to think about it, but that is COVID, and we are a lot together, but we've so far chosen not to completely come together for those
Yeah.
meetings. So maybe it's just, we're talking about it. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's like an argument to be made for both, which I find is like the tension point. So from what you're describing, what I like about what you're describing is that it allows like people are different behavioral styles to sort of come together the way that we are more naturally inclined to. So most likely I would be the person that's in the room with you, Digby, right? Like I would want to be in the meeting with you. But we also know that there's people on our team that just like have no desire to like be up close, that they're happy to stay in their home offices and sort of connect. So in some ways it really solved that, doing it that way, Digby, and doing it a little bit differently, just like really honors people to show up the way that they want to show up. But something, Megan, you talked about before that came actually out of our last book club, which I never really thought about. The last book we read was called The Stress Code, talking about the importance of cortisol and connecting our hormones together with one another and just like resyncing everything. So I do think going forward, how we gather in business, how we meet, it's gonna change. Like it's really gonna be designed by the business as it relates to them. Because like I said, I feel like there's need for both. Like there's need for you guys all to be on this bus together, Digby, and be connecting your cortisol and like I say falling in love with each other again. And then I think it's awesome to be able to meet in a way that sort of serves everybody. So I just want to call that out. Jazz, have you been a part of anything? Doug, have you been a part of anything?
Yeah, I went to a funeral in July, and so it was my friend's mom. She's a teacher, so there were a lot of people, because a lot of her former students showed up, and it was amazing because, I mean, restrictions were lifted, before, you can only have, I think, 50 people, but the church was packed. And it was like it was a huge contrast to a previous funeral that I had attended during COVID times, which was over Zoom, and I think it just really showed like the power of gathering in person and being able to say goodbye and grieve and also celebrate people together as opposed to through a screen. So,
yeah.
I'd say, I mean, there's probably two that stand out for me, and one similar to Jasmine. My uncle passed away back in January, and they live in Ontario, and of course at that time doing a funeral was not really possible. They waited until June, and it was good in the sense that I think it had given everyone sort of time and space. So it was a different type of, I mean, yes, it was still sad, of course, but it was just a different type of celebration. He was a former football coach at Western, and so there's all kinds of people in the community in London that knew him. But I think it was just, it just felt a little bit different than I think other funerals have been to. And then the other one, which probably doesn't really fall under the scope of a typical gathering that we're talking about here, but here in Edmonton at the University of Alberta, we hosted the men's university basketball championships back in early April, and just having, I think, everyone back. We had packed gym, everyone back in one place. And I think because of the pandemic and the way that the school year worked, there were more students that were able to come out that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And so it just created a whole different dynamic within the gym. And I mean, I've been doing, going to and broadcasting U of A games forever. And it was probably the best one I've ever been a part of, just because of, I think, some of those little factors that initially probably we thought they were going to be a problem, but they turned out to be things that completely changed how that event went. And it was other than the fact U of A lost, but it was a huge success beyond that. So
So that's to Doug. Scott, my son played at U of A.
Oh, I used to call, so I didn't, okay, yeah, Scott Lee's games I used to call all the time. So
Yeah.
you may have suffered listening to my voice for a little while.
That's he was there at the end of the tail end of Don Horwath's days.
Yeah,
He
that's
loved
right.
Don.
Yeah.
And you either liked him or you didn't, but he liked
Yeah.
knowing where he stood.
Yeah, oh no, I worked with Don for a few years, and that's a very well put. You either liked him or you didn't, but he
Yeah.
was a very successful coach. So, oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, I
I'm
remember calling Scott for
laughing
sure.
over here because I know that like Digby's ears perked up as soon as you're like, U of A basketball, that was your meaningful gathering. He's like, I couldn't agree more.
Well, that was hard to miss. I was going, yeah, I was on the board of Canada basketball for 10 years and vice president. So
Oh,
been
wow,
involved in
yeah.
basketball in my life. So sorry, I don't
No.
want to railroad the conversation, but just saying.
Oh man, no, you know, Carolyn loves some good synergies and some good connections between people. So I love it when people find that commonality, I guess. How will we go? I don't know. She says like, one thing that was interesting that I don't think I have a knack for, but I'm open to it, is like creating a little bit of like tension in your gatherings, or like not being afraid to like, yeah, like just create a bit of tension. So I'm going to do that in a safe way here by just asking like, what didn't you like about the book? What don't you like about the book?
I'll start. I don't mind tension.
I know you don't.
And
It's
if
all
you
good.
look at what she says, you start off, it's the first few comments don't get quite as deep, and they get deeper and deeper. But I was already sharing this when we came on. I thought when I started to read the book, I just thought, this isn't telling me very much. I didn't like the part about not inviting people. That actually offended me, because I'm like you, like everybody come, like especially people like everybody's your new best friend.
Best
So
friend you haven't met yet.
yeah, I mean, how do you know who's going to be a good, you never know, right? So I thought it was kind of boring, and I thought I was flipping the pages because I had to, because I was committed to it. And so like, you have to have a purpose in the meeting. Well, of course you have to have that was my attitude to start with, but I really liked it. I thought the first, and unlike most books where I'm finished halfway, this book I started halfway, so very different. So,
Oh yeah.
So what didn't I like is I had to read the first half of the book to get to the second half.
Right. Good point. Jazz, anything you didn't like?
At times I felt it was a little bit name droppy.
Yeah.
I think, she's a New York socialite, and
Yeah.
it's like, I can't really relate to some of the things, but like the business parts were good. And some of the personal stuff obviously was I enjoyed too, but sometimes I was just like, really?
Like, yes, like when she had to go for etiquette lessons or something.
Yeah, or like when she's, it's interesting when she's talking about the artist, and you put you're quiet for 30 minutes, and I was like, I don't know that I could do that. Like, it just seems like maybe 10, maybe
Yeah.
10. But
Yeah, totally. Megan, anything that you didn't like about the book that you remember?
For me, I think my current radar is attuned to people taking ideas that have existed before and not crediting them properly. So I get rubbed a little bit by knowing that a lot of her knowledge comes from others that she's not directly crediting. So I'm always, but she's a woman of color, and so I'm also aware that these interpretations are coming through her own lens. So I'm just, because I know a lot of her own training and her own background, because I've also done a lot of it, I'm just interested in her path and how she got here. This book has blown up beyond, I think, anyone's expectation. And she created a podcast during the pandemic called Together Apart that was very successful. I'm a huge champion of her. I love what she stands for, and I love how she's really trying to get us to think differently. But I just think that there are a lot of people that we can lift up on our own way. And so I think she's doing that more intentionally now. This book was written several years ago. So
Yeah, Great call out there. Well, I will just end by saying, like, the generation that came before me was really into their silverware and place settings. And like, if I hear my family fight about silverware, like one more time, I might. But it made me, like, it actually made me want to be more intentional around when I host friends over, around using the good stuff, like think about setting up the room, like in a way, bring back the things that I know my mom and grandmother used to do, which is like make the table, set the table, put the place settings out. And that, I mean, I think there's a time and a place, but it actually just sort of inspired me to look at it less of a chore, of something that I have to do, and more of like something to be grateful for, something to like that setting the table is a way of like welcoming your guests and like creating that space of like, we're just sort of like here to really enjoy some of the finer things in life, like use the nice wine glasses and just celebrate that gathering. So I'm gonna end it like that.
Can I share one
Yes.
final thought?
Yes, please,
Just
please.
because as Digby was talking, my advice or my kind of, having run a lot of ceremonies in person, a lot of gatherings in person, a lot on Zoom and a lot of hybrid, is do not take the same meeting and just change the venue of like, put it onto Zoom and act the same way. The way you are in a hybrid meeting should look quite different than if you were all together physically or all together virtually. And if it doesn't, start to try to figure out why, because there's, if you have half of the room virtual and half of the room physical, you are experiencing different things. People are distracted and people might not be as focused. They might not feel that same kind of, connection and cortisol kind of level of being there. So how can you adapt, and how can you look at what you would traditionally do and adapt it to those different unique situations? So there's
really
lots of research out there.
That's
Great
really
advice. Great advice. Great
For sure.
advice. And thank you. Because I actually don't have a very strong close for today. Any suggestions on how we can do a strong close, Megan?
Well, I think that, before you kind of click off the Zoom button and just kind of rush back, is always just kind of thinking about one thing that you're going to take with you, maybe just sharing one word of like, this is, something that I was introduced to, or something that I was reminded of, or, how you're feeling on the way out, so that we kind of leave this meeting here and then click end and then kind of move on to our next task and feel that kind of threshold. So my word is just I'm reminded. That's kind of where I'm feeling right now.
I'm going to use more than one word, because if that's okay.
rules.
I know. More than one word is I want to spend more time thinking about, how do I get people part of the event before the event? How can I intentionally invite people to be a part of the event before the event? That's my takeaway. Jazz, Doug?
I am grateful to be invited as always, and grateful to see some familiar faces.
Awesome. Thanks, Jazz. Doug?
Well, I'm grateful too, since I cheated and hadn't read the book and you still allowed me to come. So I'm grateful for that. But I'm more intrigued now to read the book than I was before, because I've heard some really interesting comments from everybody. So thank you for that.
Great. Digby?
Megan, my new best friend.
And we're neighbors.
You know how much I love that. Meeting new people and hearing stories. And so, Megan.
Fantastic. All right, everybody. Thanks for sharing your precious time with us. Love seeing your faces and great chatting. Thanks, Megan, so much for coming today.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Caroline.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.